Hello everyone, my name is Dita Thami, Director of Operations at RegDesk. Thank you for joining us today. The goal for today's discussion is to understand the EU's new medical device and IVD regulations. A brief intro on who we are. RegDesk helps device and therapeutic companies navigate regulations, go faster into new markets, avoid penalties, and be confident that they're acting on the right guidance in over 180 countries worldwide. We're a trusted intelligence source for healthcare companies globally, and with us today, we have leading expert from Belgium, Dr. Christian Huyghe. Dr. Christian Huyghe is the founder of a highly regarded consulting company based in Belgium. He holds dual MD and MBA degrees, and he began his career as a clinical cancer specialist. Having been in the life sciences industry for over 30 years, Dr. Huyghe has led teams for companies like Pfizer, Boston Scientific, St. Jude Medical, and Servier throughout his long career. His experience in consulting and market access has seen him working with a broad array of technologies, ranging from pharmaceuticals and medical devices to vaccines and ATMPs. Before we begin our discussion this afternoon, I'd like to turn our attention to our attendees. Thank you for joining us. The topic of this webinar has actually been a very popular one, and in the interest of time, many attendees have submitted their questions in advance. While every effort has been made to address these questions over the course of this conversation, additional questions can be submitted by using the chat button on your screen. Please submit your questions throughout the course of our talk, and we will try to address as many as we can, whether it be via email or time permitting once the conversation has ended. Dr. Huyghe, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Rita. Well, obviously these new regulations, and first of all, we need to stress the word regulation because it means it's going to take effect as the date it is published, and it will be implemented all along. But there's no more political decisions insofar, and it regulates the marketing of medical devices and of in vitro diagnostics. Perhaps you would think of these regulations as being a revolution, but it's more sort of a very strong evolution of the MDD and AMDD, which are already in place, and the IVD directives who are in place. Now it will have effect because some of the products will be reclassified, and we will come back to that. And there will be several implementations of what I will mostly call control mechanisms on the marketing of medical devices and diagnostics. We'll come back to that in later due, but it is definitely, as of the implementation of these regulations, manufacturers will have to check the qualifications of their existing products and see if they need to take necessary steps and ask for more approvals and quality checks than what they have today. And we will come back because obviously there will be quite some changes also with the notified bodies as we go along through this talk.
I see. So, Dr. Huyghe, what types of investments will be a consequence of these new regulations, and where will they take place?
Well, there's several, and I would perhaps not call them investments, but costs of doing business, basically, because that's what it will entail. These regulations will increase the cost of doing business in Europe, no doubt. It's in several levels. It's on the clinical trials if you have a new product, and even if you have an existing product, it will be on what you have in terms of in terms of responsibilities as a supplier, naming responsible persons, setting up risk management systems, setting up quality systems. setting up reporting systems, the UDAMED, setting tracking systems. So there's several costs that will have to be bared by your business today, which were not necessarily there in the past. And to what extent these costs will relate to your specific product or specific device or diagnostic is a matter, obviously, of looking where your products are classified, how you have to comply with the different regulations. And also, if you have, for instance, a device which has several developments, obviously each of these developments will have to be certified and certified in a much more stringent way with communication of data than it is today. So I think, yeah, it's roles and responsibilities will be more strictly defined, and especially the element of responsibilities will entail costs that are above the ones you might encounter today.
Absolutely. I know that specifically with the notified bodies, the system with notified bodies is becoming stricter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Would you be able to elaborate on the changes of the role of notified bodies?
Well, I mean, definitely. The issue obviously is with all the problems that have occurred in the past with PIP implants and with metal-to-metal prosthesis, and all of these have led the governing bodies to the feeling that there were some safety concerns with devices which were not addressed properly. And one of the typical issues is what they call notified body tourism, where if you didn't get what you wanted, you could go to another one. And obviously, this whole issue with notified bodies will be much more stringently regulated. There will be controls of notified bodies. And notified bodies will have to play a somewhat different role as well. According to the regulation, they can also do audits, especially if you're in class 3 products, to control quality and to see that designations are properly done. So it's definitely more power to the notified bodies. It's an increased scrutiny of the data. There is still some uncertainty how notified bodies will meet them. So some might cease to operate. And then the question obviously entails what will happen to your CE marks that you have been granted. And so another issue is what will happen with the UK notified bodies. Today is a quite important day where the letter of Prime Minister May has been sent. And so what will this entail? Will your approvals for your products cease to exist? So all of these issues will have to be addressed. In any case, all CE marks will become invalid at least at the latest 4 years after the taking of effect of the regulation. So there is definitely a lot of scrutiny, and it will impact manufacturers. I think you could almost for sure appreciate that this will increase services from notified bodies, and to what extent obviously is difficult to say. It will also depend on in which type of products you are.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of the products, would you be able to elaborate a bit about how device and IVD classification schemes will be affected by the changes?
Oh, there's a lot to say about that. Obviously, that is a thing where these regulations definitely do a lot of changes and reclassification of device will be have to be based on new scientific evidence or any information that becomes available in the course of vigilance and market surveillance activities. And it can be taken by the Commission on its own initiative or at the request of a member state after consulting with what will be developed, will be managed, and I was looking for the English word, Medical Device Coordination Group. They will install a medical device coordination group, which will have a key role in the supervision of these regulations. And so the class will stay the same. The classification will be class 1 for low risk and commodities, 2A, 2B, and class 3 for the highest risk products. So that is not a change. But what will be a change is that some of the products which were now deemed to be accessories, so like for cleaning or disinfecting of class 3 products, will be now also classified into class 3. So there will not be device accessories, but there will be class 3 products. And active therapeutic devices with an integrated or incorporated diagnostic function will also fall within class 3. Also, devices incorporating, I'll just give a couple of examples, incorporating nanomaterial are in class 3 if they present a high or medium potential for internal exposure. So another important element in this classification is for software classification. This is now included, and if it's for diagnostic therapeutic decisions, it will be in class 2A. But if therapeutic decisions as of software algorithms or apps or whatsoever have a serious impact on patient health, it will be class 3 or class 2B. So it is now very well defined, and yeah, it will have to be taken into account in the classification and also in the certification, obviously. Hence the need for quality assurance systems. In vitro diagnostic devices will also undergo some classification rules changes. Class A devices will be the sole responsibility of the manufacturer, except when they are intended for self-testing or near patient testing or sold sterile. And all other classes will all require notified body involvement. The majority today fall under self-certification, and most will need to use notified body for some form of conformity assessment. So that is in brief all the issues with classification and reclassification. So yeah, the lists are clear, are published. I haven't seen the publication of the regulation yet. I'm following it on a daily basis, but it's supposed to be imminent. It's just a matter of translating it into all the several local languages, and God knows there's a lot of them.
Right.
And then it will be in effect. In fact, yeah, like I said, there's no other issue. So as soon as it's there, you can start looking for your products today or your products tomorrow, where you think it would be most appropriate.
That you're absolutely right. I know that you gave a lot of information, and I know that right now that it's still a little bit hasn't been super defined yet in terms of classifications for certain products. But moving from there to the next step, can you talk a bit about clinical evidence requirements and how they will be impacted?
Yeah, that is, from my perspective, one of the most important changes you notice here, because it's as a consequence, obviously, of the hiccups that has been here, and then with the PIP implants and with others. And then the feeling that exists with all local bodies that either are regulatory or are other from the payer side, that Europe is like the developing ground for medical devices, and then they go abroad, they go global, they can go to the US, they can go everywhere else. And this is where definitely a lot of change will happen as well, from pre-market to post-market. Obviously, for post-market, they introduce post-market clinical follow-up, the PMCF studies on one hand, and other hand, the periodic safety update reports, like it's very common in the medicinal field. These will become obligatory to a certain extent, where it is deemed obligatory by the notified body. Now, SIRS, to my update reports will be obligatory always, yeah, because it's a matter of following up side effects. I know for companies that are local here, have a local branch here in Europe, they don't even follow European surveillance. So that will definitely have to change. For post-market clinical follow-up, that will depend on the type of device, the risk inherent with the device. And obviously, if you're in a class 3 with a new device with a high risk, you know for sure you will be asked to provide post-market clinical follow-up. All of this will definitely entail, and you will need people that are well versed in the vigilance field and in the periodic safety update reports and how to report. And obviously there is clear definitions of what safety issues are. They're serious. They impact health, and they can be lethal, to name just a few. On the other hand, for new products, obviously for all studies, it introduces the notion of a sponsor. So somebody will have to be designated a sponsor. It doesn't necessarily always have to be a company. It can also be an institution, but obviously, if it's a company sponsored, the company will have to reveal itself as a sponsor. And every study, like is with the clinical trials in the medicinal field, will have to be notified in a centralized database on medical devices, which is called EUDAMED, EUDAMED. And this obviously will outline the scope of the study, the objectives, the criteria, etc., etc. So there's a lot of information to be provided, and which is very delicate. But yeah, that is the way it is. The medical device regulation also allows manufacturers of class 3 of the highest risk devices to consult with an expert panel and to provide feedback on companies' clinical strategy. And it will be the role of this panel, and then included in the assessment, to review the clinical development strategy and proposals for clinical investigation. So this is obviously, what I would say, a pre-submission scientific opinion of what is achievable with the medical device, and what is also, because there's always a lot of discussion, what is achievable to demonstrate with the clinical study. Obviously, it's sometimes impossible to do sham operations or to do placebo-controlled studies, whatever people might pretend. But through a mechanism with the expert panel, these things can be cleared and can be better defined and better outlined. I think performance evaluation for IVDs is another issue, obviously, that is important. It is obviously somewhat difficult to say, well, that diagnostic will for sure influence a patient flow, because there's so many a patient outcome, because there's so many other elements that can play a role. But still, it there's clinical performance studies will have to include the demonstration of scientific validity next to the traditional analytical performance, obviously. And for the first time, a sort of responsibility on the manufacturer towards the clinical utility of their IVDs, which today is just, okay, well, it measures sodium, it measures chloride, and that's what it is. What the validity of that is, over the decades, we use these parameters we know, but if you find new ones, obviously it will be mandatory to show what the utility is of the new diagnostic you have defined. So the generation of the new clinical evidence will have to be planned and will discussed with notified bodies who will to carry out the conformity assessment. So yes, that there also obviously there is increased investments and costs to be made. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just in terms of structure and every facet of this new system, there are some additional responsibilities in each structure. Moving from there, kind of on the same vein, can you talk a bit about the changes that exist for the manufacturer and his supply chain structure? So we're moving.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very clear. For a manufacturer, he needs to appoint a qualified person responsible for regulatory compliance. This person will be responsible for conducting the clinical evaluations, including the aforementioned PMCFs, the post-marketing studies, and the performance evaluation for IVDs. He will set up a risk management system covering the entire life cycle of the device, and setting up a quality management system that organizes the quality of processes and procedure applicable to the device. So quite hefty, if you ask me. It obviously, there must be, like I said, setting up this person must also have procedures for a system reporting incidents and field safety corrective actions, and also comply, and we come back to that later, with unique device identifier, and obtain mandatory insurance to cover insolvency and other claims for damages, etc., etc. This is for the manufacturers. Then there is obviously new responsibilities for importers and distributors, because they must include specific verification of compliance, reporting, storage, and complaint duties, and they will be responsible for labeling and registration of the device. They obviously cannot be held responsible for all of this themselves, but the regulation places the responsibility on importers and distributors to verify the compliance of their upstream economic actor, and to show that, okay, they have looked at it. They cannot say simply like this. You cannot say, well, I'm not doing this, it's the distributor. And then the distributor say, oh, I didn't know about anything. I thought it was the manufacturer who had done. Agreements will have to expel very clearly that all these issues are covered. And also regulations introduce express liability of the authorized representative, because he will be legally liable for defective devices on the same basis. So jointly and severally with the importer and manufacturer. So once again, agreements will have to define very clearly who is liable for what, and if anything happens, no pass through from one to the other. Now it will have to be very clear from the outset.
Yeah, so quite a bit more oversight on each actor's part, it seems.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, definitely, yeah.
so as you discussed a bit, you touched a bit earlier upon the new UDI system. Could you please elaborate on that?
Well, the UDI system in its purpose is quite simple. It's to ensure that there is complete traceability of any device which is placed in the human body. And for this, there's a whole system with medical device, a device identifier, and a device identifier and a product identifier. And it must be obviously on the package. It must be on the outer package, but not on the shipment. And with these unique identifiers, so it means serial numbers. Um, it entails also keeping up with the database. But I understand you have the system already in the States for this. Okay, it might need some adaptations. There's also systems in place in Europe, in some markets for medicinal products. So I don't think it's such what would I say, difficulty or software from a software perspective and hardware. This is readily available technology, but once again, it entails extra costs which are not made today, and it's all a consequence of things gone wrong in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be interesting to see how quickly it can be implemented, and I don't think it should be that difficult. What would you say that the impact on a manufacturer's current product registration would be at this point once the regulations go through?
Well, that is so every company will really have to look at as soon as the regulations are published and the list what it will entail for his products. Will he have to reclassify his product and therefore go to a notified body to get the approval? Will with the Brexit issues, will notified bodies in the UK still be allowed to work? Will notified bodies, on the other hand, still want to continue working with the much increased responsibility and liability also? That's the other thing. They will be more liable if anything goes wrong. So it's obviously a lot of scrutiny that any manufacturer will have to apply to his product line, current and under development, to see where he's classified, appoint regulatory persons, responsible persons, and ensure his clinical studies are in line. So yes, the coming years will be very important.
And when do you believe, Dr. Huyghe, that these regulations will be implemented finally once?
Everybody I spoke to said it's going to be published this or next month. So the implementation is clear. There is no local transcription or local things to need to be done. No, anybody needs to follow these regulations. It's a regulation, it's not a directive. That's the difference. And therefore, it is said in these regulations that they will become into effective in 2020. So you basically have like 3 years to organize yourself, to get used to it, and to see how the field will evolve, how the different notified bodies will develop themselves, and who will remain, who will stop, how they will work, how do they see their role, how the medical device coordinating group will operate. But this definitely is happening in 3 years, and God knows how quick 3 years passed, so you better start tomorrow if you are doing business or consider doing business in Europe. The in vitro diagnostics have a 2 extra grace years, so it's only 2022. But perhaps for some diagnostics, it's an even bigger step to make, because you have to yeah, demonstrate utility and things which we're not used to do in the industry. That's
Absolutely.
the thing, and work with notified bodies. So yeah, in a nutshell, this is what the new regulations have in place. So a lot of things to care about.
I agree. Dr. Huyghe, thank you so much for your time today, and to our viewers, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions specific to your product with respect to the EMA or any other regulatory agency worldwide, please contact us. If you'd like to contact Dr. Huyghe and engage him, please contact us as well. My contact information is right here. If you'd like to learn more about RegDesk, we will be hosting a brief webinar explaining our novel approach in the coming weeks. At the end of this call, you'll be automatically directed to a short survey about your experience today. We'd appreciate your feedback. Thanks again for your time, and we look forward to chatting with you.